So, hello. Can everyone hear me okay? I've just shoved this thing on, and I hope it works. So yeah, welcome to my session, Swearing, Nudity and Other Vulnerable Positions. In direct contrast to the last two, I am not a psychologist, and I am utterly unqualified to talk about this topic. I will also say that I blatantly lied to you all. There's very unlikely to be any nudity in this session. So, as they say, law of 2 feet and all that, there's probably drinks and things out there. But I'd like to sort of introduce myself and go through what my background is. So, I've been working in software for about coming up to 20 years now. And last year, I decided to start this podcast called the Agile Path. And all I really knew was that there were a bunch of podcasts, a bunch of things in that space, and I just didn't want to do something that was the same as that format. Generally, you get a bunch of experienced agilists who sit around in a Skype call and they have a conversation. And that's great, and I got a lot of value from that. I often found that the frustration for me was that actually the engineers and the teams and the people that I was working with, they're not going to listen to that. They weren't interested in that. It didn't resonate with them. So I wanted to sort of somehow come up with a way of presenting things that perhaps engineers and the team members and who knows, even the management might listen to. So I had this idea, but I didn't really know what I wanted to talk about yet. So I went to Scotland. I jumped on a train very early in the morning and ended up in Scotland at 9 a.m. just in time for the opening keynote. And I basically just went round and spoke to people. I just said, look, I'm there with my microphone. Look, I'd love to speak to you about what matters to you. What matters to you in the way your teams are working. When you're working with teams, what really is something that resonates? And it seemed that everything that people were saying, clicker's just gone off. There we go. Everything that everyone was saying was related to this thing. People would say things like, I could just see that my team wasn't safe. I'd go, that's interesting. I know what you mean by that. Innately, instinctively, I know what you mean by that. As someone that's worked with teams, I knew what they meant, and I knew what that felt like. But I said, what do you mean by that, really? I said, you can just tell by the way they walk in the room together, by the way they hold themselves, by the way they talk to each other. And I'm sort of like, yeah, but no, what do you mean by that, really? It seemed like safety was essential but enigmatic. It seemed like almost like dark matter or dark energy. It's essential, it's holding the whole universe together, but nobody knows what the hell it is. So I left Edinburgh and I thought I had this really great topic for my first episode. I was like, great, I can put together a documentary. It's a topic, it seems really important, really foundational. There's a bit of a mystery to solve, a little bit of research, and I'll be all good. But once I really got into it, like Alice down the rabbit hole I tumbled, I ended up speaking to many different people. Some of these people are very, very well known, and some of these people were people that were literally engineers and people on the teams, and some of the managers and people in the organizations I was working with at the time. I really wanted to get an idea for what people's experiences at different levels were of this concept. What did this really mean to them? And I'm sure Joseph and Jasmine will be glad to know I also did some other research. And that took me to a project, a Google project called Project Aristotle. They mentioned this briefly in the last session. So Google, you may have heard of them. They're quite a large organization, and they do quite a lot with software. They wanted to work out why Team A is great and team B is not? Why is it that when you have lots of teams, one team does awesomely and another team doesn't? And they decided that maybe the obvious answer to this, in fact, they worked through a whole host of different hypotheses, and one of them, and a very obvious one, is this problem that, well, obviously Team A has, this keeps going off, Team A has amazing people, and Team B, not so much. So they started their research in 2012, and over 2 years they studied almost 1,500 people across 180 teams all around the world. And they discovered that actually team effectiveness is less about who's on the team and more about how they work together. So what makes a great team? What did they find? So they found 5 key indicators that the team members on their highly effective teams, and obviously this research is limited to Google's experience, but if you work in the software industry, there is there definitely is a good correlation there. So we're going to go through these in reverse order. So at number 5, we have impact. Team members on effective teams need to see that their work has impact on the organization they work in. So what does that mean, really? So if you start working at Facebook, at any level as an engineer, the very first thing you're going to do is take part in their developer boot camp. And part of this process is working out how you fit into the organization. But one of the really important things that you will do when you start there is often on the first day, if not within the first couple of days, you are going to push code live to Facebook.com. Now that might be the tiniest change, but you know what? It feels pretty impactful. You know, I just changed that button to a slightly different shade of blue, and 1 billion people saw it. That feels pretty good. Then there's also, there was some other research done by a lady called Teresa Armablay. This is in her book, The Progress Principle. She did a lot of research taking daily diaries from individuals working on knowledge work teams across America. I think it was just America, it might have been international. And one of the most important things she found is team members that were most engaged with their work or most motivated, they would find that they reported making regular progress on meaningful work. This is the individuals that reported in their daily diaries that every single day they were taking little steps towards a goal. They were reporting that they had made something. Now there's another word in that definition. That word is meaningful. So meaning is number 4. In 1983, Steve Jobs called up John Sculley, who was presently working over at PepsiCo, and he wanted him to become Apple's new CEO. That didn't prove to be the best thing as it happened, but at the time it seemed like a good idea, don't they always? And when he called him up, he said, do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want to come and change the world? What Jobs was doing there was tapping into our deep-seated human desire to do meaningful work. We want to do stuff that matters. We want to change the world. But what does that actually mean for most of us? Because I imagine most of us are not working for organizations that are alleviating the world of poverty or curing cancer. If anything, we're probably contributing to those things more than we're helping alleviate them in many cases. So, meaning is actually a very personal, subjective thing. This means that this could be as simple as me producing knowing that I'm doing the best work that I can do, okay? Even if that work is not necessarily contributing to curing the world's ailments, but me knowing that I've done a really good job and being facilitated in doing that. And it's also maybe me knowing that I've supported someone else. I've worked with someone else. and contributed to their success. So one of the areas that I've seen this work, and is a particular agile practice that I'm a huge proponent of, is pairing. And there was a study done, I think, in the mid-90s, but annoyingly, I edited my slides the other evening, and I've lost the date on my notes. I think it was 93, possibly. And at the University of Utah, they did some research into the effectiveness of pairing. Now, this has a bunch of the expected outcomes that we might see. So, yeah, it shows us that teams that pair and individuals that pair tend to be more effective. There are lower defects. These are the things that, if anyone's heard anyone talk about pairing, you know about. But there was a couple of more interesting stats that I found there, which were that 96% of the engineers in the study reported that they enjoyed their job more than when they're working on their own. And 95% said they had greater confidence in the solutions they produced. The meaning in this context comes from the satisfaction of knowing they were doing the best they could do and supporting their pair in this case. Structure and clarity. So, teams and individuals need to know what they're doing to be good at what they're doing. This is pretty obvious. It's quite hard to be good at what you're doing if you don't know what you're meant to be doing. At the very least, you're going to be annoyingly missing expectations. So, a quick show of hands. How many people in this room feel that they have a good grasp of their organizational goals, how their project contributes to those goals, and how they fit into it? If you're like 100% certain on all of those things. So, I cannot see anyone up there, but I can't see, from what I can see, not that many hands. So, completely scientific study, I'm going to go with about 7.5% of the room said that they are in alignment on all of those things. That doesn't surprise me that much. So, I find teams are often on the wrong page on this. I have an exercise I do with teams that I'm working with where I give them all a post-it note, and I say, go and hide in the corners of the room and write down a few words to describe what you believe the organizational project, etc., depending on the context we're working in, goals to be. I had one time where I had alignment of sorts. The team went away and they presented me with their post-it notes, and I put them up on the wall, and I was presented with 8 question marks, which was a little depressing and a little disappointing. So, dependability. Teams that get shit done are better than teams that don't. This isn't the most surprising discovery, but interestingly, there are 2 levels to this. On one hand, you have the external dependability. You have a team that actually does stuff. Well, unsurprisingly, they're the good teams. That's not rocket science. You also have internal interdependability between team members. And this means that I, as a team member, can commit to doing something to another team, and the team know that, or they have a certain level of trust that I can be depended on to fulfill that commitment. And what's interesting here is I get a lot of people, they say, well, we're technical teams, we're doing software. What if you just get stuck? You say you're going to get it done by the end of the day, you do your best, and you don't. Does that mean this whole thing collapses down around us? This is not dependent on every team member always delivering all of the time and never having any problems ever, because that's not reality ever. But this is dependent on team members saying, I will do this by the end of the day, but if I can't, I'll say something. And that takes us to number 1, psychological safety, as we've already been exploring a bit today. The interesting thing with psychological safety, and we are obviously going to explore it more, is not just that it was the number 1 thing, but it also underpinned all of those other 4 indicators. In Google's experience, where this wasn't present in the teams, it was very, very unlikely that the teams were had any of the other indicators. So, why does it matter? We are really, really reluctant to do things that could negatively affect how we think other people view us, okay? And this tends to be around these three areas: competence, awareness, and positivity. So, competence, do you feel that you can ask for help when you need to without being judged? Awareness, do you always feel you can ask what the goal is without sounding like you're the only one out of the loop, perhaps? Positivity, do you always feel you can raise the red flag when you need to without being judged? Now, positivity for me is a really interesting one. I'm going to describe a team member to you, and I'd like you to raise your hand if you have worked with this person or are working with this person. So they're called the energy black hole. So does anyone, can you raise your hands? Can you leave your hands up? Who's working? Yeah, okay. So now leave your hands in the air for me. I'd like you to lower your hand leave your hands in the air rather, if in your opinion this person has been in the organization, I'll just say, for longer than other people. These people are often like furniture in a way. They're sort of there, you come in, oh, he's still there, still alive. Now what I'd like you to do is just imagine this person and take yourself back in time. This is often quite a long time, to their first day. Now I imagine that this was not their first day. I come into the office, it's my first day in a new job, I sit down and just go, oh shit, another day. Because that wasn't their first day. Almost certainly was not their first day. I'm pretty certain they skipped into the office with glee and lightness and all of the traits that you absolutely could never imagine this person having. I found that these individuals are almost like the canaries for organizational culture and team safety. It's actually what happens to you. This is what happens to you if you stay in this organization a long time. We'll come back to them a little bit later. So, Amy Edmondson, we mentioned Amy Edmondson before. Psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Now, when I first read this, I really struggled with these words, punished and humiliated. Because I just thought, you know what? Managers don't punish their employees, not really, not in the normal environments that most of us are lucky enough to work in. You know, go into the store cupboard for 30 minutes and think about why you failed the sprint. I've never heard that. And humiliation, when I heard that word, I just imagined some poor engineer who had just admitted to not knowing the latest NoSQL database to be released last minute. And all of the team members are going, I can't believe you didn't know what that was going on about. It's been out for 35 seconds, for God's sakes. And it just didn't gel. I was just like, I don't get this. Punishment and humiliation seem so strong. But then you realize that this is not talking about necessarily an observable behavior. This is describing an internal experience. Because you know what? If it was your fault that you failed the sprint, and maybe in your next review, that bonus you were really needing for Christmas doesn't quite happen how you wanted it to. Or that team that you've been enjoying working on, and the manager just says, you know what, I think it might be better for you to work with this other team. You know, the one that's got that massive pile of defects and shitty legacy code that you really don't want to work with. I think you'd be better off over there, the new team doing the cool stuff. Yeah, we don't want you on this team anymore. You feel punished in those circumstances. And if you raise the red flag, or if you raise your hand and say, I don't know about that test framework that came out last minute, or that NoSQL database, and the team members say, yeah, go on RTFM, then you do feel a little humiliated. So, change of tone. One of the people I spoke to was a chap called Phelan McDermott. He's an Olivier Award-winning theatre director, and he's been working with improvisation for about 20 years now. And he spoke to me about this concept called yes and in improvisation. So he described this as the yes and muscle. And what he spoke about is this idea that, now, who in here has seen improv before? Anyone seen an improv show? Have anyone done improv before? Okay, good. So what happens in improv typically is you have a group of performers. I'm a little lonely up here, not for much longer, and generally someone's going to have an idea. Okay, they might walk in through an imaginary door and go, "Honey, I'm home," and then in an ideal world with slightly, I need like a budget for support actors, there would be another actor on stage and they're going to listen to that and think, okay, so this person, my other performer, has made me an offer, has made an offer to the team. And this is a suggestion that this person is maybe in a relationship with someone, they've come home, who knows, maybe they're joking. Let's think about what they've offered us as an idea. And I'm going to listen to that and accept that without judgment, okay? Dave just presented this to me. I'm not going to block that idea. I'm just going to accept it. And then I'm going to add my own bit to that and continue the story. So I might then go, I'm just in the shower, darling. I'll be down in a minute. And then hopefully the story would continue. And one of the interesting things that he pointed out here is that when they're working with very inexperienced improvisers, they teach people to say yes all the time. Just say yes to everything. And the reason for that is that people don't know they are saying no. Sometimes you don't realize when you've rejected an idea from someone until you've rejected it. You don't realize you've shot someone down, because most of us don't go into these conversations with bad intentions. So the important thing here is we need to pay attention to our fellow performers to make sure we're expanding upon what they have given us and not creating an environment that stymies creativity. What I'd like you to do, and we're going to do some exercises, but I'd like you to hold that thought and think about meetings that you might have been in. Most of us will have been in a meeting where we've had to try and solve a problem together. And think about maybe what an attitude of judgment, or rather no judgment, and acceptance in that meeting, how that would change the dynamics of that. So, I would like everyone to stand up. You know, that really annoying thing where you're going to have to put your laptops on the floor and put your papers down, and you need to find a partner. If anyone is completely free or devoid of a partner, then feel free to come up here. It is even better if you don't know them, but that's just that. Now, if anyone is devoid of a partner, I might need a volunteer to help demonstrate. So, not yet, in a minute. Is anyone free of a partner? Can anyone take the terrifying job of walking up the steps and helping me demonstrate? Any ideas? Do we really have an even... Oh, there we go. I was like, really, we just happen to have an even number of people. Hi there. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do is we're going to face each other, stare deeply into each other's eyes, and hold our hands up opposite like this. So you copy me, and we are going to mirror each other. So one of us is going to start moving, and we're going to copy that movement as best as we can. This is much easier done when we do it very slowly. And interestingly, what we're going to do is try and swap control, so you will take control. And the aim is to do this in a way that if I was viewing you, I wouldn't know who was being reflected and who was the mirror. So let's see how we do this for a minute or two. So if you... Okay. Uh-oh. If you do it fast, it's much harder. Thank you very much. And we should do a high five. All right. Thanks, guys. So, interesting points to make here. You are all probably smiling at each other. And some of you may know that we evolved smiling as a defense mechanism because mammals, unfortunately, have an unfortunate habit of eating our children, which is very awkward and kind of antisocial. So our babies decided, you know what, if we smile lovingly at our parents, there's a reasonable chance they won't eat us for their breakfast, and thus we have smiling. So smiling is, in fact, a defense mechanism in many, many animals in the mammal world. So that's one of many improv warm-up exercises generally, and I highly recommend if you are doing retrospectives and other types of meetings that you consider the energy levels in the room, and those sorts of things do a great job of improving that. So now we're going to do my favorite exercise. This exercise is called String of Pearls. It's a storytelling exercise. So what's going to happen is that another willing volunteer will come up and will tell us at the beginning of a story. They're going to stand here. Once upon a time, there was a lunatic in a Flash t-shirt giving a talk. And then we'll have another volunteer come up, and they're going to stand here and tell us how this story ended. Now, unfortunately for me, when I was speaking in Nashville earlier this year, the last line that was the follow-up to the one I just gave you was, and he was dragged out to a back alley and murdered by an angry mob. That put me in an awkward situation. I couldn't really tell whether they were loving it or hating it or what was going on there. So ideally, as little stories about violence against me as possible, but that's the only constraint. So what we're then going to do is, if you imagine, we then have the beginning and the end of a story, but we do not know how those two things will connect necessarily. And so what will happen is more volunteers are going to come up and fill in the gaps for us gradually. Each time someone comes up, we're going to review the story, see where we're up to, and decide as a group if we're happy with the story that we have told. I will say that the stories will generally make sense in the wonderful universe that we are going to create here together. We're not aiming for literary genius, but this can, sometimes it produces some interesting results. So what I would love is the most terrifying part of this, especially with the psychological barrier of steps to climb up. Could I ask a volunteer to come up to kick off our story? Has anyone got any ideas? Any ideas? I imagine I'm going to, unfortunately, people up in the circles, that it's harder for you to take part unless we can bungee down or something quick. I don't recommend that, by the way. That's not... So does anyone have any ideas for the beginning of the story? This is the most terrifying part for both me and you. I'm dependent on you for the success of my session. Any ideas? Volunteers? Yes, here we go. Do you want to come straight up if that's okay? Yeah? Sorry, pardon? Could I ask you to come up and say that, please? Thank you. Could we get the... You'll be handed a microphone as you come up. There we go. So okay. If you can stand here, please. I think that's probably a decent place to stand.
Fine. So you are in a rental car, and it says it has a 3,000 CCM engine. It's an American car, a pile of crap. And you want to test it, so you put the metal to the pedal to the metal, and you drive at 100 miles per hour.
So what shall we do? Shall we try and contract that down to 5 words or 10 words or something? You were driving at 100 miles an hour.
You are driving at 100 miles per hour, and then the police shows up behind you.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so driving at 100 miles an hour, police behind you. How is this story going to end, people? That's a pretty good start. I like a good action sequence. We can have anything. Unicorns, rainbows, glitter. Go ahead. Come straight up. We can use the same mic, but since we have 2 mics and we're starting at both ends, we could pass them into the middle.
The story ends with IBM buying your company.
IBM and IBM bought your company. All right, so let's reread our line. So let's see where we're up to with this story.
Okay, so driving at 100 miles per hour in Arizona, and the police shows up behind you.
And IBM.
And IBM buys your company.
This sounds like a tale of corporate morality. This is great. So let's see. So what is the next stage? How are we going to iterate on this story? What's the next bit that happens here? Now you can add your sentence at any point in this timeline. You might want to start at this end, or you might want to start over at that end. What's the idea? Any ideas now? Yeah, come straight up. Come straight up. So stand wherever you think you're most safe, and take the microphone from the person closest to you.
You and the police start a meaningful discussion.
So pass the microphone down there. Now what I'd like you to do is reread the line again. Let's see where we're up to. So you're going to have to say this a lot, I'm afraid, those first volunteers.
Okay. I'm puzzled now.
So, hold it.
Mine is easy. Driving 100 miles per hour, police behind me.
Then the driver and the police started meaningful discussion and decided to go to a bar.
Oh, there we go. That's a good end.
And in the end, IBM buys your company.
Okay, we've got a bit of a literary journey to go on, guys. I point out there is a bit of a gap here between IBM buying the company and two policemen having a meaningful discussion. So did they just let the guy go? Did they let the guy go, people? Did they just think, this guy's an idiot, we're just going to go to the bar? Or what? What happened? Jake, do you want to come straight up? So take the... Oh, are you going to go at the end, in the middle? Ooh.
Somewhere over here. And the sergeant said, we're going to have to take you down to headquarters. IBM headquarters.
Well, at least we got a link to IBM. That one's your one. There we go. So let's reread the line and see where we are.
Okay. Driving 100 miles per hour, police stops you right behind.
So they have a meaningful discussion and decide to go to a bar.
And then the sergeant said, we need to take you down to headquarters, IBM headquarters.
So they take the person into the bar with them from the sounds of things, or they meet some other mysterious stranger in the bar related. Any ideas, guys? What is this going to go to? We had a high-speed police chase that ended with a couple of people having a chat in a bar. That wasn't the ending I was expecting. We could insert some explosions in here. I don't know, maybe. I'm just getting excited. Anything? The stock market? Bitcoin? More buzzwords? Can we put some psychological safety in here somewhere?
No professionals.
No professionals.
Elon Musk was riding in the passenger seat of your car.
And again, please.
Still driving, 100 miles per hour, police is behind me.
Elon Musk riding in the passenger seat of your car.
And they decide to go to a bar for a good discussion.
And then the sergeant said, we're going to have to take you down to headquarters, IBM headquarters.
And in the end, IBM buys your company.
Okay. So, I don't know what experience you guys have of corporate buyouts, but I'm sure there's someone in here with some knowledge they can inject into this story, because I don't think many of them start in a motorway, motel, bar or in Arizona. They might do. I mean, in fact, maybe all of them do. I don't know. Depends which part of the Trump Corporation you work in, I imagine. So, any more ideas? Where are we going to take this? We're going down to IBM headquarters. How is that going to end up with someone purchasing IBM? Maybe I think we need a unicorn in here somewhere. That would solve everything. It works for software teams and excited product owners. Let's try this. Unicorns. It's interesting how much of a barrier the aisles are. I wonder what the percentage involvement is if you're like right in the middle. You know. Do I need to model climbing over chairs to get you guys to come up? Oh, go ahead. Come straight up.
In the bar, you talk about your security company and how you stole those IBM computers from the headquarters.
Okay. So we're going to solve the problems in the US police force, I think, by this. This is. Go ahead.
Still driving? Not anymore. Being stopped by the police.
Elon Musk is in the car with him.
They decide to go to a bar for a good discussion.
About your security company, which helped you to steal a brand new IBM computer with Elon Musk with you, not noticing anything.
And then the sergeant says, we're going to have to take you down to headquarters, IBM headquarters. Getting good at this.
And IBM buys your company.
All right. We've got to close this up, guys. Come on. Where are we going with this? IBM headquarters, buying the company. Ideas. I thought I saw someone put their hand up there, but it wasn't. She was just sneezing. It's fine. It's okay. Ideas? Maybe someone right from the middle, so then they could climb over the chairs to get here. It could add some drama and excitement and health and safety risk. Ideas? IBM, purchasing company, police chase. I think we need to bring back the high-speed police chase in a way. Maybe they take the guys on a joyride. I don't know, maybe. Drugs? Anyone got any drugs? No, it's a bad offering. Just saying that drugs often feature in these stories. Oh, go on. Please tell me it wasn't about drugs. It could be.
Yeah, I had such a big fine. I got such a big fine from the police that I have to sell my company.
Okay, I think we might have it. So, just in case we have it, we won't know until we demo it. I express everyone put the utmost amount of passion you've ever put into any sentence you've ever said in your entire life in this line.
Driving. Am I passionate? Being stopped by the police.
No judgment.
And Elon Musk is in the car with us.
They decide to go to a bar for a good discussion.
You admit that you have a security company and you managed to steal the latest IBM computer with Elon Musk with you not noticing anything.
And then the sergeant said, we're going to have to take you down to headquarters, IBM headquarters.
Yeah, and I got the fine and I have to sell my company.
And I did. I sold my company to IBM.
Woo! All right, you know what? I think we'll call it there, unless people would like to add more to this story. But it is traditional that we cheer very loudly to celebrate the story that we have. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll take those, or do you want to give them to the other? Thank you. Okay, so pick up clicker again, reset it so we can change slides. So, what do you think? Did we tell a good story? Yeah? I don't know. Let's see, sort of somewhere between your 1-part, 2-part Netflix miniseries and Hollywood action blockbuster. I don't know, somewhere in there maybe. Was the activity an engaging activity for people? You find it engaging? Was it interesting? It's not like a judgment of me. Was it an interesting activity? Yeah? Why do we think we found it interesting? Just shout out, I'll repeat. Why do we think we found it interesting? Any ideas? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, exactly. So there's a couple of things there. So you've got both just the general intrepidation of, oh God, I've got to come up on stage and seeing what people come up with. There's also the fact that actually you have this sort of mystery and people are like, oh God, there's a story and we have no idea how on earth they're going to try and make these two things work. There's actually a few other things that I think happen while we're doing this. It's safe to contribute ideas without embarrassment. Now, I wouldn't say it's actually completely not embarrassing. It feels pretty embarrassing. But it's safe as far as no one on the stage is going to send you away. You come up, you say your crazy line, and we work with whatever we get. And everyone's inspiring each other as we work towards the end of our story. everyone also has autonomy in their contribution. You know, people aren't going to come up if they don't want to. And while there is a bit of peer pressure that grows, especially when you have smaller audiences and smaller groups, I've done it in quite small sessions where you end up with quite a few more people on stage than there are now sat down. And at that point, you suddenly realize, I want to be with the majority. I just come up with an idea. And it's safe to fail. Interestingly, while we describe this as a storytelling exercise, the goal is actually not to tell a gobsmackingly amazing story. What you learn while you do this, regardless of the quality of the story, is about listening and collaboration, and the outcome is what you learn about that, and not necessarily the quality of the story. So after I spoke to all of these people and did my own research, I wanted to make a definition of safety that resonated more with me. So for me, you're safe when you can speak your truth, raise your concerns, and give and receive constructive feedback without the fear of humiliation, rejection, or punishment. So we then ask the endless question, so how do we get this thing? Now, there are, as Jasmine mentioned, you can look at A.B. Ebronson's research. She has questionnaires. Also, Google have some equivalent things for assessing your team's alignment with each of their indicators. And maybe I'm a little cynical, but I have this fear of, in probably not far away enough, an certified organizational safety consultant wandering around your office with a clipboard going, round tables, that's good. Oh, I think, is that eye contact? Yeah, okay, awesome, eye contact. And just checking, are there any managers in this retrospective? No. Good. Okay, guys, you know what? I'm going to give you a 97% rating for safety. I'll be back next year. You'll get my invoice tomorrow. And I have some deep concerns about that because, like almost anything relating to Agile, it's not the practices that really matter. It's the mindset and it's the approach in the first place. So I've worked with a number of teams, and since I started doing this research, this has really transformed my approach with the teams I'm working with. And like Jasmine, I didn't find anything that definitively told me how to foster engagement, as certainly not empirically proven. But I have my own approach. Now, I call this paying attention, and this is very similar, I think, to what Jasmine was talking about with regards to awareness. Now, I break down paying attention into 3 levels. At the first level, I call it experiential. This is me understanding my experience of safety. This is me focusing on the question of, oh, I felt safe before. I felt I had a voice. I felt I was able to contribute. I felt comfortable being me in that environment. And now I don't anymore. What's changed? What's happened? Just get to know yourself in this circumstance. Then you have what I call extrinsic. Now, this is the expanding that level of awareness to the people you work with every day, the people on your team, the people you see every single day. And starting to, again, just observe, actually, and just begin to increase your awareness. Okay, well, I feel safe now, but my gut feeling tells me that maybe James doesn't feel safe now. I wonder what's going on for him. And then you've got the next level, which I call environmental. Now, environmental breaks down into 2 areas. At level 1, you've got the organization. Now, this is definitely what Jasmine was talking about when it comes to culture to some degree. But I've certainly seen, and I think that what this really translates to is often organizational policies that directly affect the way that people collaborate and communicate. Now, it's interesting. We watched that little video in... I don't know whether I can say pronounce the guy's name. Zuba's talk? Zuba? I don't know. If I've completely trashed your name, I apologize deeply. And it was the little thing from MasterChef. Now, interestingly, in that video, you've got an interesting dynamic. All of those individuals are trying to collaborate, okay? But interestingly, they're also trying to beat each other. And that's an interesting problem for collaboration, because everyone really just wants to win. So when they're being interviewed afterwards, they're going, yeah, she was a bit of a shitty leader. It was all complete chaos. And then they're like, yeah, I just felt like I didn't know what was going on. And then obviously you add to that the additional pressure of Gordon Ramsay coming in and going, this all looks like shit, as he does. And you have almost the worst possible systemic environment for effective collaboration in those circumstances. So you have those things. We often see equivalent situations in organizations that choose to stack rank employees because for some reason they thought that was a really good idea. And you have this situation where everyone is instinctively fighting against one another because everyone knows that they have to be in the top 5% to get the bonus they need. And then there's another element to organizational safety, and obviously that question around culture and policy is a massive one, so I'm not going to dive too much more deeply into that. This is what I call the person. This is you and your life. So could you raise your hand if you have a life? I hope. There's one or two people sleeping, but that's fine. They'll pick up their lives at the end, I'm sure. This is an interesting one. We have organizations that have policies that say things, not policies, but unofficial, implied, cultural ideas that say things like, it's unprofessional to have a personal life. Leave your personal life at home. And the problem I have with that is, well, firstly, I've never found a cloakroom big enough to just hang my personal life in so I can get on with my day detached from all of the complexities of my situation. And that's never worked, and it always seems to stay attached as soon as I hook it in. The problem is that we pretend, because organizations hate complexity and uncertainty, so we pretend and we live in this wonderful fiction that says personal life doesn't exist, because if we can just tell people they shouldn't have a personal life in the office, then we don't have to address all of the inherent complexity and challenges that those personal lives bring. The reality, as it is in many situations, is very different from the hopeful, optimistic ideals of organizational leadership in many cases. And the reality is if you have kids and you're up all night with your toddler, you're going to be a bit shitter in the office the next day. You just will be. You're going to be tired and you're not going to be as effective. And that will probably affect your work and your contribution to the goals in your organization. It just will. So we can all pretend that our professional life stays at home, but our personal life rather stays at home, but it doesn't. We bring it anyway. And when it comes down to it, I hope this is true for most, but frankly, your spouse and your parents and your children and your friends are more important than any urgent delivery you might be required to stay for. So there's another element to this. A lot of what I've just spoken about is observing your peers. And we spoke a little bit earlier about the energy black holes in your team. And I want to tell a story about a company called Menlo Innovations. So this is a guy called Rich Sheridan. He's their CEO, and he runs this company. He wrote a book called Joy Inc. that I really recommend. Now, he told me about one of the things they have in their culture, which says, when I come down, when I witness another team member or someone in the company behaving in some way that you could just describe as unsatisfactorily, okay? This could be anything from outright temper tantrum, losing their mind, punching someone, to someone just being a bit grumpy in the morning, or not hitting a goal, or apparently being disengaged. You start that conversation by taking them to the side and say, are you okay? What's going on? It seems like you're struggling. What can I do to help? This is addressing this negative behavior with curiosity and not judgment. So paying attention is about noticing how you feel yourself, noticing how the people around you are feeling, and approaching people and the organizations with curiosity over judgment. So why does it really matter? So obviously, your organizations will, your teams will be more effective, and we've seen that there are various benefits to that. If your teams are more effective, chances are you'll make more money. That's great. But there's a bit of a deeper layer to this. So this is a survey taken, I think this is taken from the Gallup survey, taken from around January the 15th of this year. This actually hasn't changed much since then. I double check it occasionally, but it's roughly the same. This is taken for US-based, based on the US workforce, but this figure is pretty much static internationally, certainly when they average it out internationally. So what does this show us? It shows us that by their assessment and their definition, which is here of engagement, only 1/3 roughly of the workforce are engaged. 2/3 of the workforce are half the workforce are disengaged, and 15% are actively disengaged. What that means is that these are the energy black holes. These are actively disengaging these people. And if we look at this definition, having an opportunity to do what I do best each day, having someone at work who encourages my development, and believing opinions count, how much of that is possible without psychological safety? But I don't think very much of it. My opinion, 100%. But I don't see it. In fact, while it's my opinion that those are the reasons, there is, as Jasmine mentioned, there is empirical research behind the links between psychological safety and engagement and vitality. And then we have this other slightly more depressing figure from the American Psychological Association in 2015. Workplace stress is, well, 2/3 again of the US workforce consider workplace stress or work to be a very or somewhat significant contributor to their experience of negative stress. And out of those people that experience stress, let's come back again. God, clicker trouble. 1 in 2 of those lost patience with their kids or shouted at their spouse. So I was reading this and I thought there must be a link here somewhere. Now, if you do, and I did, research and look up psychological papers looking at links between stress and engagement, there are literally, I think I found hundreds of studies that seem to repeat the same thing, which is you go into an organization and you assess, based on a variety of standard measures, their level of stress. And then you assess, based again on a variety of standard measures, their level of engagement. And you go, wow, look at that. Everyone's really stressed, so engagement is really low. I thought, meh, that's not that interesting to me, because it's obvious. It's obvious. No one feels engaged when they feel stressed. No one. Not really. You kind of do in a short term. In the long term, it destroys you. So what I was interested in is the reverse of that. And then I discovered some work done by Evangelina Demaruti, if I can say her name properly, and others around this time. And many other people have worked on it since she originally published this with Arnold Backer, called the Job Demands Resources Model. Now, I don't have time to go into this. It's a big topic. There's a ton of research around it. But I want to describe to you a story that I think explains the heart of this. So, imagine this. You're in the office and it's 7 p.m. and you're just thinking, you know what, it's about time to go home now. And your manager bursts in through the door. Shit, shit, shit! And you sort of sat down and you look up and say, is everything all right? And he says, oh, God! Yeah, can I help at all? The CEO's coming tomorrow. And you're like, yeah? Well, no, I don't. Well, he needs to see a demo. Okay. Of what? The project. You mean the project we started an hour ago? Yes. What do we have to show him? Well, we don't have anything to show him. We started it now. I'm about to go home. Just sort it, for God's sakes. I need to go home. I'm too stressed. He storms out. He's having a bath to deal with his stressful day. You're at the office, and it's now 10 p.m., it's 11 p.m., it's midnight, you've had 19 coffees, you're all jittery. And by about 2 a.m., you just about finish, and you go home, but you're pretty wired because you've had 19 coffees, and you don't really sleep because you know that at 9:30 when the boss comes in and the CEO's there and the demo that you made breaks because the manager moves the mouse 1 pixel to the left a little too far, which you will do, you know it's your fault because you did it, right? And there's another story. It's 7 p.m., you're in the office, and you have just started the project that you have been waiting for. This is the project. You managed to stop all of the other projects, like the crappy project you were just on, it's just finished. You would sit down and you start working on it, and it's just flowing, and everything's going. Oh, it's 10 a.m. It's 2 a.m. even. God, I better get home. And you go home, and you sit in bed, and you're lying, staring at the ceiling, and the ideas are still going round in your head, round and round, and you think, oh, fuck it. And you pull out your laptop, and you sit and you work all night until the birds are tweeting outside, and the sun's just poking up over the trees, and you finish that last thing, you commit the code, you save the PowerPoint presentation, whatever it is you're doing, you slam your laptop closed, you charge in, barely having a shower, charge in through the door with your laptop above your head. I've done it! I've done it. And the team come round you and they go, wow, that's awesome. And they sit down and they look at your code and they say, that's great, but please never ever work through the night ever again. Now, maybe that's a little disappointing, but you know what? At the end of that day and that all-night marathon of work, and I am not suggesting people work through the night, you are full of joy and passion and love for that work. When we're engaged, we are more resilient to the negative effects of stress. The reverse of this, and the studies that found that, they were absolutely true. There is definitely the connection that says, when I am stressed, I am less engaged. Definitely. But actually, I am stressed because I am disengaged, because the work that I'm doing is stressful anyway, but I don't feel it in the same way. I don't experience the negative effects of stress. So, safety is the number one indicator of effective teams. Without it, engagement will be decreased or even non-existent in many cases. And the lack of engagement brings lower resilience to stress. Stress has been called the health epidemic of the 21st century by the World Health Organization. And the estimate is that it costs US businesses something like $300 billion a year. And we already saw the health risks in Mary's talk earlier today. So I like to end on a quote as well. Safety is a very profound thing. Not being emotionally abusive in the workplace sure would make the world a better place. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. We'll take just a couple questions in the interest of time. So the first one's...
Oh, I want the second one. Sorry, go on.
We'll address that, but not count it. So I am lost in safety, agile, and chaos. Could you sum up in one sentence?
For me, it's about people. We need to recognize that people are at the center of our organizations and address their needs. That's it. Do that, and you will solve that.
Yep, and we'll skip the swearing and nudity one. Edward has asked, how does one get an energy vampire to be more flexible and start saying yes to some ideas?
So I'll tell a little story that happened to me very recently. A couple of years ago, I was coaching a team, and then I was coaching a coach, and I replaced myself with this particular coach. And he called me a few months ago and he said, John, I've just moved to a new team. I know you're not working here anymore, but I just could do with some advice. He said, I'm just working with this new team, and there's this guy. It's like everything I do, he's just pushing and pushing and pushing. And I just said, so have you spoken to him? And he kind of went silent. When I haven't spoken to him. In fact, he knew that I hadn't, because he knew that was the first thing I was going to ask him. And he said, look, of course I haven't spoken to him. Frankly, it's hard enough him being in public, in the team, while I'm there, let alone being locked in a room with him in a one-on-one. That sounds like the most terrifying thing in my life. I said, what do you imagine is scary about this situation? And he said, well, I'm basically going into a room with him and saying, your attitude is shitty, fix yourself. Which is, in fact, a situation that many managers think is the answer. Tell your people they need to sort themselves out. You're on a performance improvement plan. In 3 months' time, you're fired if you don't sort yourself out. And I just said, look, let's just change that conversation, because he was obviously angry. And I said, look, what about take him go into the one-on-one. You're both going to be awkward. He's expecting you to give him a bollocking, as we say in the UK. He's expecting that. I said, just say, look, Mike, we've been working together now for a couple of weeks, and I can see you're really struggling with some of the changes that we're putting forward. What can I do to help make this easier for you? And I said, you know what? He's not going to answer. He's probably not going to say anything, okay? Don't worry about it. So he called me not that long ago and said, you know what? I spoke to him. And it was a Friday evening. He's had the meeting with the guy, and Mike said nothing. He sort of like shrugged, and they went off. No, you can't help me. It's fine. Whatever. And the next morning, on Monday morning, he came in late. And one of the things he had told the team to do in the 2 weeks said, I'd like to challenge you all to pair for 2 hours with anyone in the team just over the next 2 weeks, and we'll discuss your individual experiences. And this guy was like, I'm not pairing. I don't want to do it. I just want to put my headphones on and get on. I don't care about working with anyone. It's never been like that before. And he came in, and the first thing he saw was Mike sat next to Jenny. And in fact, Jenny, in her one-to-one that he had, because Jenny was a friendly person, had explicitly said how hard she found Mike's attitude, okay? And apparently he wandered over to the team, because he was in late, and he wandered over to one of the team and said, what's up with Mike? He's working with Jenny. And they said, oh, yeah, in the stand-up, Jenny said that she was struggling with our microservices architecture, and Mike just went, oh, you know what, I've just been working on that, why don't we pair? And they sat down, and they worked all day, actually. Now, what's interesting here is that this individual did change. He was the energy black hole. But he never asked for help. Okay, he never actually ever asked for help. He never said, I'm struggling with something. But he changed because he knew that he was being supported. Okay, he knew that he was being respected, and he knew that the fact he had been struggling, as opposed to just having a shitty attitude, was noticed. And to me, I've seen that, that's one example, but that was a recent one, but I've seen that quite a lot. When team members know, now, I'll be honest, there are many situations when team members aren't necessarily savable, okay? This is because actually these people that have been in the organizations for a very long time, there's a reason why Arlo Belsh's quote describes this as emotional abuse. They really have been abused. They've been in these organizations for 20 years in fear, blame-driven organizations, and they're not really, they are going to be in a really difficult place, and it may well be that as an organization you simply can't support them through that. There are other stories, but I'm not going to go on anymore. But that's just saying that it's not always the case. But for a lot of people, I've seen that. Simply offering help is a really good way.
Great. Sorry. And there was actually voted up, a lot of people wanted Edward, who asked that question, to answer it himself.
Oh, go on.
Test. Hello. Oh, there we are. Can you see me up here? I know it's blinding down there, so I'm like the voice of God up here. It's kind of interesting. Thanks for the question. I don't want to steal the spotlight from John. And I asked him because I wanted the answer too. So I feel bad now that I have to answer the question when I was looking for his advice. The only situation I can give that was off the top of my head, I'm in a position where I have to generate ideas to get more business for our company. The person I have to go through, or had to go through at the time, I was basically making that person's job worse by getting more business into it. I was giving him more work. Okay, so there was a conflict of interest there. And the solution that I basically did in that particular case was convinced a sort of skunkworks budget. Skunkworks is the code name for a portion of Lockheed Martin, the defense contractor, that basically was their like secret R&D department. And the way it worked was I said, look, just let me have a very small budget, okay? And I'm talking like $50, $100 a month to do whatever I wanted. But the key here was I was going to be asking for forgiveness instead of permission. So I got this budget, and it was very low risk. I had some ground rules, and I could do whatever I want with that money, but I had to document whatever I did and then show the results afterwards. And with this individual, he was a very data-driven guy. And when I gave an idea, there was no data because it was something we have never tried before, and he shot it down. But then with this little budget, with this very low-risk approach, I could actually show him numbers, and that won him over. So that was that specific situation. I coped with that.
So a form of experimentation. Right?
Yeah.
Yep, small experiments. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
John.
you very much.
We've got a little gift for you.
Oh, seriously? That's amazing.